we got Puppet Pin Tools, which is a great tool for creating many type of different animations using warping and different type of movement. Adding these Puppet Pin Tools to an image or a footage, I will go into the Puppet Pin Split Layers composition, where I just created this simple footage of a pin made up of 3 different type of Illustrator files. We get the pin, shadow, and the ground layer. First up, having a Puppet Position Pin tool as a so-called Deform pin that I will attach one in the bottom here of the pin, make it stay in place, and one pin in the middle of this round area to make it, or to be able to make it move. Whenever we attach or add a pin into a layer or an object, we attach that pin to the layer so-called mesh, which is an area, a type of network or strings, kind of lines that builds up together. And whenever you attach a pin to that, you're also affecting how the animation will behave within this area. To show the mesh, just tick or mark the mesh show on the very right. Zooming in just a little bit and attach a few more pins here on the right. Now, seeing that the web or mesh becomes a little bit tighter with both smaller and more connections at the same time. Thus, it's becoming more stable and moving a bit less around those points, but also increase the actual density for a bit finer movement compared to those wider areas. Let's undo this again, and in the drop-down options for the effect under Puppet, we can choose the engine as the underlying system. Either we can choose the new default one, the advanced, or just go back to the older old school version called Legacy. There won't really be that many reasons for actually not using the advanced method. Perhaps at some occasions when your computer or system maybe can't handle the advanced one, then you might want to check the Legacy instead, as a little bit more nice to your computer perhaps. Mesh Rotation Refinement lets us set any type of number between 1 to 20 to be able to adjust how much the position and starch pin will rotate. I will go forward just half a second and drag down the head of the pin to the ground to kind of show the difference here. Now duplicate the pin and lower the original pin on the left to 1 and keep the other at 20. So keeping a higher number makes the animation a bit more bendable, while lowering it make it more stiff. Now the option on transparent is connected to the mesh expansion and shrinking, or larger and smaller. As we can see, whenever we're dragging up the expansion a bit in the toolbar, the mesh becomes bigger and covers a larger area around the target, while shrinking or decreasing the value, it will cover a bit less, going down to the very negative. Now, if we were to switch on transparent instead, it becomes a little bit more obvious which areas we're covering with the mesh, as everything else becomes transparent and not affected by the actual animation. While we're up in the toolbar, the density lets us set the complexity of the mesh with the highest number or value, with the 12, giving us a bit more detailed mesh. While lowering it to all the way down to 0, which just makes it thinner or less detailed. A rule of thumb could be to use the high density mesh for a little bit higher type of complexity animations where you just need a bit more control and details of it, while choosing the low density when you have a little bit more simple animation and maybe you not want that really smooth type of movement in it, and also when you need to decrease the render time a little bit. We then got auto traced shapes, which mean that After Effects automatically traced the outline of this shape or the object, and we're able to create the mesh when the pin was added. This always happens except for those cases when you have a predetermined type of outline, meaning a a type of shape layer or a text layer that always has a kind of set outline. Also, if there might be some type of problem with auto trace or when they're just having some really complex type of tracing. Taking the ground layer for this example, consider going to layer and auto trace to create mask. Now giving us this option to fine tune the tracing a little bit before we start adding some pins to it. Choose time span for the current frame or work area and what type of channel, either with the alpha, the red, green, blue or the luminance. We might want to invert the so-called input layer before searching for edges. And there's an option to blur by any given X amount of blurring of pixels before auto trace. Used to reduce artifacts in general or those little bit jagged edges, but should be kept off whenever you want to do a little bit more fine detail type of tracing. Tolerance, which controls how closely the traced path follow the edges, and with the lower values down to 0.1 pixels, being just a bit more precise, while higher values allowing more deviation or flexibility. A minimum area to be traced, where anything under that pixel value is ignored. Threshold sets how much of a pixel must be visible to count as an edge, whereas with higher values making more of it solid and lower values making more of it transparent. The corner roundness increases the smoothness of the mask curve with a bit of higher value up and vice versa with lower ones. Finally, either just apply it directly to the layer or you can tick the box apply to a new layer to create a separate one. Now having an outline mask around the layer, and by just adding a pin to this layer, go into the options and press the plus on compositing options, thus making it possible to choose a mask reference. And the one we just created, indicated now by this boxed circle icon to the upper left. Now moving back to the pin layer and down to mesh 1. We have an adjust density and expansion here as well. Then into Deform to view the actual puppet pins. So our keyframes here are for the position movement, with the lower puppet pin 1 used as a type of anchor, and the upper puppet pin 2 will be animating the whole movement. So a good idea whenever you're having some static pins like that anchor is to delete those keyframes that you don't want to move. Just so you are perhaps a little bit less risk that you happen to animate things by mistake, and it's also just a bit more easy to not have keyframes laying around everywhere that you're not actually supposed to be moving or animating anyway, so just makes it a bit more effective. Under pin type, sticking the same pins in a drop down as we saw up in the toolbar, except for just one here. But the good thing here is that we're able to change an existing pin to another one, which is kind of smooth. So to show the starch pin, I will add a new one. Just that where the lower part of the pin is bending over, as this one tends to strengthen that area and causing a bit less distortion there. So getting this slightly more breaking than bending effect, if you will. By changing the upper puppet pin 2 to a bend pin, it becomes possible to both spin or rotate the pin around 360 degrees, as well as we can inflate it or scaling it, making it blown up or squeezing it together. While the advanced give us a bit similar inflating scaling tool, but instead it will rotate around this point and circle, plus also a point in the middle to move the object's position. So a few more handy controls. All movements are animated here directly in the composition, or as well down here under the pin type and property values. The last option welcomes the ability to be able to record any type of movement using the puppet pin tool together with the mouse cursor in the composition. So super useful. To be able to reach that one, just go up to the record options. Set speed to 100% for the same playback or animation as whenever you're recording, while if you were to raise it above 100, the animation playback will be in a bit of slow motion, and vice versa. If you go under 100, it will play back faster. Increasing the smoothing value reduces the number of keyframes within the motion path, so it's just making it a little bit more smooth and a bit less jerky or bumpy, perhaps, if you will. We got the use draft deformation, which temporarily ignores the kind of stiffening effect of the starch pins whenever we are recording to improve the performance a little bit. Finally, show mesh does just that. So whenever we're recording something, it will show the mesh. And then just after combining everything a little bit and doing some small adjustments, it looked something like this. Adjustments were made pick whipping the position using an advanced puppet pin tool on the very shadow. And then just finally scaling it up a little bit in the end. And that's pretty much it, with the intention of just getting the timing right when the pin started to bend or break, at the same time as the wiggling or the kind of leaning just stopped.